So I think that worst advice, the world's worst advice for a PhD is to work on as many projects as you possibly can. And I want to talk about that because I think it's super important. So if you don't know me, I am Professor Dave Maslach. I'm an associate professor of innovation strategy and entrepreneurship, and I created this whole reciprocity project to give back as much as I possibly can. There's so many people that help me out that I want to pay the favor forward to help you out. So you hear this advice all the time to work on as many projects as you possibly can. But the problem is that we don't get any returns by working on many different projects. What ends up happening is you get stretched too thin very quickly and you don't really understand what's going on. You really do see this as you sort of progress within the career. What people are looking for is an expertise in a particular area, that people understand that particular area really, really, really well. That's what you end up getting known for. It's not for all the other things in terms of all these different projects that you're working on. All of that stuff doesn't necessarily matter. People understand you develop an identity. So immediately when you're young in the career, right? Like you are a PhD and an assistant professor, that you want to work on all of those different projects because that's how you get tenure and stay at those particular institutions where you'd like to go. But the problem is that all of that stuff, it looks like you're eventually scattered in many different ways, and people don't really understand what you're about. They just understand that you're this kind of generic person in this generic area. But you have to sort of develop an identity in what you're doing. And the way that you develop an identity is you focus on something. Ultimately, that's what a PhD degree is to focus on something. It's for you to focus on something narrow and to stay within those particular domains. I think we often get pulled in all these different directions because they seem interesting for a second, and then you realize, oh my God, this is totally not what I expected. And then I've wasted all of this time and effort focusing on all these different things rather than focusing on the one thing that I was really originally interested in. So if I can encourage you all to think about this, to pull back and come back to what you're really interested in and really start asking yourself, is this what I'm about? Is this my identity? Where am I going with this? Does this make me more complete in who I am by working on this particular thing? I know it's seductive to work on all these other things, but trust me, it takes a lot more work than you're ever going to imagine to do these things. It takes years to do these things often. Many, many years to work on these things. And you might think like, no, that's not true. That's not what I've been told. It is true. It takes a long time. Ask any of the top scholars in your field that is known for something. Ask the one thing that they're known for. Ask them how long that they actually worked on that one paper that made them famous in that particular area. They're going to tell you is an unbelievable amount of time on that particular area. And you're going to be like, no. And you're going to be like, oh, that is true. What he's saying is actually the truth. It takes a lot of time, a lot of work to keep going at something to make it so that everybody understands what that particular idea is. Now, there's a difference between getting a paper published, and there's a difference between a conference paper and then getting a different paper published, and a difference between getting a paper published that everybody knows and respects. That is, there's qualitative differences between when you see those, and once you start seeing them and what's going on, then you understand that it just takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of effort to get to the point where what you're writing is clear, it's a new idea that nobody else has thought about. So to get there, you always have to think about, golly, this is a lot of work, and it's going to take me a lot of work to do this thing. And if it's going to take me this much work, do I truly want to do this? Is this what I want to do? Now, the other thing you forget is that by focusing on that little tiny area, that one little thing, you start to develop economies of scale from that, or you really start narrowing down, right? That's one of the rules within economics that is, I think it's actually a legitimate law in this world, is that if you narrow down and you get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, it becomes better because you can take advantage of the littler specialization that you get, and then you get economies of scale from that because you're focusing on that little tiny thing. Look at all the people that have made their career. It's always on one little tiny thing, one little tiny idea, one little tiny technique, and they've exploited it in many different ways. And that's it. That's ultimately it, is to go as narrow as you possibly can. It is far harder than you ever think to work on all of these kind of things. And it just never works out the way that you intended it to work out. And everybody realizes what's going on when it's too late. All right, so hopefully you learned something from this. Go as narrow as you possibly can. Simplify, simplify, simplify. Make it as narrow as you can. It's always the way to go. That is the default. When I write something now, I think, this is simple. And I write it, and I'm like, it's not simple enough, because people still don't get it. And then you gotta narrow and narrow and narrow until it becomes simpler and simpler. It becomes harder when it's simpler. I'm gonna tell you that. It's harder because you're creating an idea that is more robust, and everybody is gonna be like, oh my God, I did not know. I thought that was a particular, I thought this was gonna be easy, or I thought this thing was easy. What you want is you want an idea that it's so stupidly simple that everybody's like, golly, I wish I would have had that idea. And then when they read it, they're like, well, that's stupid obvious. That is a really obvious insight. How come somebody should have written about this already? And then they look it up and they think, oh my God, nobody's written about this already. I wish I would have done that. That's what you want, is that response, that narrow, and that's because they did it so narrowly. And you look back and everybody's like, no, nobody did write about this. This is the one thing that is so critically important to all of these other ideas. Nobody else has written about it, but it's so stupidly simple. I wish I would have written about it. It's honestly always the case when it looks like that. All right, take care and have a wonderful day. Bye.